Chris's life has completely also changed my life. And that's the exquisite mutuality that Father Greg talks about. So Chris, share a little bit about who you are.
Good afternoon. My name is Christian. Was born in Guatemala, the city of Guatemala, 1971. Some of my story, it's a little broken, in many pieces. I'm still, recovering from many of the traumatic experiences I had as a child. Starting from, my memories go back when I was about 3 years old. I have endured sexual abuse, physical abuse and verbal abuse, which have had damaged my life, up until the time I met Jude in 1992, summer 1992. I'll just briefly tell you about, where I come from. So I grew up in the city of Guatemala. I was an orphan, grew up with my grandmother. Apparently, both my parents were very young at the time. When I was born, my father was 18 and my mom was 17 years old. And, they decided to, live their lives different way. It was 3 of us. 2 of them passed away in 1976.
2 brothers.
2 of my brothers, a little, 1 year younger than me. We had an earthquake that happened, I think some of you remember, probably heard in the news. About 23,000 people died that morning in Guatemala. We lost about 6 family members, and 2 of them were my brothers. We were sleeping in the same bed. That was kind of like the first traumatic experience. I was 5 years old. Woke up the next morning. I saw my 2 brothers. I tried to wake them up to go play with me, and my grandma was crying the whole time. And that was kind of like the first thing that kind of broke my heart. Going forward, it was very difficult. Growing in a country that was very poor. Of course, it's invisible when you are living in that place. It wasn't until 15 years later when I went to Guatemala that I was kind of like, wow, shocked to see the place that I grew up. That's just one of the things. So I decided to. I think my father migrated to the U.S. Back in 1986, and it took him about 2 years to get to Los Angeles. Through that time, I was 13, 14 years old, and I was still with my grandmother. In the city, there started to gangs started to rise. It's kind of like the New York, if you know a little bit about where the struggle of the ghetto, starts. It's just that started happening in that part of the city. I joined one of the gangs, and had some issues, and in 1989, I said to my father, I didn't have a really good relationship because I did not grow up with him. We'll see him here and there. My mom I've never met until I think 86. When my father left, before he left, he said, I want you to meet my mom, and I met my mom for the first time in my life as a fully recognizable as, as an individual. I didn't have any relationship with them, so I came here, and the culture is different. You kind of have to assimilate. I only spoke Spanish at the time. I remember when I met Jude.
You spoke Spanish together.
Spanish together, right? She knew a little bit Spanish, I knew a little bit English. And that's how we communicated. So here, coming to the U.S., I've come from gangs, trying to have a new life, a new change. But it was difficult, I was a teenager. Everything is new, the language is new. I landed in East Los Angeles, which was full of gangs at the time, and I remember.
That's where Father Greg was, actually, in the same area.
Right, in the same area, yeah. Just boil access, it was hot at the time. I remember that within 4 days, I saw my first drive-by shooting right in front of me. I was walking up on, how do you say Chicago? Chicago. Walking down the street, I step in the middle of the street, this car just comes in, stops in front of me. I see a guy, just rising up from the passenger seat, and there's a group of like about 20 guys there, and he just starts shooting people. Car takes off, and I was just like in the middle of the street. The guy was like, I didn't know, what's going on, but that was kind of an introduction to Los Angeles area. I was having a hard time. This is the first time I lived with my father. I was 14, I think I was 15, and it was just difficult. He ended up kicking me out of the house. I ended up with another one of his sisters down in the west side.
You were couch surfing.
Yes, couch surfing. At that time, my outlet was skateboarding. I bought a skateboard from one of the kids from the neighborhood, and every night after work, I just skate through the streets.
So you were working full time, right?
Right. I was working full time, and I was only 15 years old. And so then I met a group of kids that will skate from 7 p.m. until like 1 in the morning. And so I joined one of them, but I couldn't communicate with a lot of them. Because it was just like I didn't know any. Some of them spoke a little Spanish. But I started hanging with them. A lot of them were graffiti writers. And so they introduced me to graffiti. And so then I started doing graffiti, and became an addiction to me. And so I ended up moving to the west side of Los Angeles.
West side meaning MacArthur Park.
MacArthur Park area.
Like San Marcos.
And so I met Roxy at the time. She was a teenager, I was a teenager, and we were trying to date. And so
mostly they fought a lot.
Right. So Roxy said, I know a group of people that can help you. At this time, I'm living on the streets. I was already using drugs, and graffiti was my outlet, to all the things that I brought from my childhood, the stressors of life, and there's just the painful situations and stuff. I found graffiti as a medicine, a way out of the struggle, in my inner struggle. Drugs were part of it, because, the streets, that's just part of life. So one Friday, I think it was, Roxy said, she started mentioning to me that, I have a group of people that can help you get out of the streets and the lifestyle that you're living. And at that time, I grew up without any discipline, because I was just a street kid, basically. I had to grow up myself, independently, because my grandma, had all these things to do, and I was just kind of like a street kid. So then she invited me to a field trip that they were going to have a beach trip. And so I come to the neighborhood, and I think I met Paul first, and then you came out after. But I walked into this neighborhood where, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the gangs were like, killing each other. Right? And you had gangs every two blocks. And Roxy was living there, and I knew a lot of the people because they were all guys going to high school, going to the same high school. And so it was just a big mess. And so I was surprised that Jude was there, and the group of people that were right in the middle of the dead zone. She came out and said, "I'm sorry, we don't have room for you."
Well, we had transportation issues.
Right. And so I don't know how, but
Came up the next one, right?
Yeah, I came to the next one, and I met Jude and Paul and Steve and all the people that took that group of teenagers to the beach. Jude and I think that at some point, at this time, God has started to work in my life. There's a lot of people that were getting killed on the streets. Of course, I found many situations where I could have gotten killed. Some of my friends died at the time, and were dying all over the place. God started speaking to my heart, and I remember one night I had a dream, and God spoke to me deep in my heart, and He said to me, "You did choose." He basically said, "I'm going to take you out. You're going to die," and He said, "You choose life or death." And so I remember the next morning, well, I pondered on that dream, and I remember I said, my only way, I knew Christianity. I had become a Christian back when I was probably about 13 years old. The reason I came to God was because of my grandmother. She had been a Christian for so many years. But I really, this time around, I was struggling with a lot of things. The PTSD was rising. There's a lot of things that I was kind of starting to look back into my life and thinking that the wrongs that I have done, and the wrongs that were done to me at that time, it was hard. So I come and, I went to a church, a local church, and I said, I got to reconcile with God or give my life to Christ. Of course, I was afraid of taking, leaving everything behind. I mean, my addictions already to drugs and just, having nothing, basically. I really didn't feel secure in Los Angeles. It was just kind of like, always watching my back, because that was just life for me. And living, as soon as I opened my eyes, I had to struggle to live. I was like, how I'm going to feed myself, how I'm going to pay my rent if I found a place, and all those things were things that I had to deal with. Father Boyle talks about, it's here right now, talks about relationships heal. So at this point, I meet Jude, and Jude and I started to somehow have deep conversations. I started to open up to her, like all the situations that I get, the sexual abuse part, and the physical abuse that I had gone through. Actually, it was at Peter's condo that we used to spend time in. And I found
my brother had a condo in LA. Yeah.
So I found a lot of. I was able to trust for the first time in my life. I was able to trust an adult, someone that that reciprocated that, why did you do that? She didn't ever say, why did you do that, or why didn't you choose to do that? But at the end of the session, the psychological session, she would.
All I did was listen. I think that's the really important thing, is I just listened. Yeah.
Right, and so at the end of every session, she will say, do you mind if I pray for you? And I thought, well, she's not going to hurt me, so yeah, it's good. It's because I was used to, the God that I knew, at that time was a God of punishment. It was a God that, growing, being punished about, how you laughed, how you walked, how you did things. I felt worthless. I was 20 years old and I felt I don't have any value. My soul was broken. And so, because, most of the hurting and the abuse happened from the people that that's supposed to care for me. I remember taking a few courses in psychology because I used to get depressed all the time. I wanted to find out, what the solution for depression was. And so I started taking some courses in psychology, and I realized, that brought a lot of brokenness, because the first course that I took in college was early childhood development. And I was really, really, everything that I was on what not to do to a child, that was me. And it opened a lot of fear and brokenness inside of me. But going back to Jude, she has brought a lot of healing into my life. It's been a roller coaster. I ask her sometimes, how you felt about me back in the days. Of course, now we're a little more steady on the relationship, but it's been a radical, kinship of she meeting my world and I'm meeting her world, and that's.
Can you do the next one? I think one of the things that, just driving down, talking about this, one of the things that we realized, this is us, Chris and I at the Arboretum with the kids, and I put this other picture up because that's Lance, he's the 14-year-old, and the other two are my niece and nephew, for my Dutch-American brother and his Dutch wife. And so it's not just Chris and I who have this relationship. The entire families have gotten integrated with each other and become family to each other. And so I realize now that that's radical kinship. It was organic. It was just the way our lives evolved. And so the very first, one thing that we didn't talk about is the first time I met Chris, God really spoke to my heart that he would be like a son to me. And God said the same thing to Chris. So there was a spiritual adoption that happened. thing that God really led us into. I brought Chris the very first Thanksgiving a couple months later, and my family just embraced him.
This
Is Taya. Hi, Taya. It was at Taya's house, and my family embraced him, and his family embraced me. So there were all these ways that our lives started to become intertwined because of the relationship that we had, which started to break down all kinds of barriers. So our theme, Chris did this. He didn't have any way to make money, and so he was doing stuff on the wall. So I said, let's make some art, and we sell them as cards. So this was one of the cards. And one of the themes that has been the theme of our life is joy. And joy and suffering are very interrelated in this world. And so we have come to really find the joy through our relationship and in our family's relationship. There's been so much joy, but I have to say, Father Greg said today, kinship is hard. And people say to me, oh, it was hard because, well, you live in this little urban apartments and they're driving. I said, no, the hard part is that when you really open your hearts to the other and you really open your heart to listen, you hear stories that instead of closing your heart off. So those hours and hours that Chris shared with me, it broke my heart again and again and again. And that's the hard part. If we really step, into Ephesians 3:14 says Jesus broke the dividing walls. And so that's, the dividing walls between all the segments in our society have been broken. But we have to step through those dividing walls. Otherwise, they're just broken in the abstract. And so when we step through and towards each other, that happened. Can you have the next slide?
Yeah, I wanted to say, it's part of the endurance of the kinship that we have. I mean, it's, I remember, talking to Jude about my issues or things that I've never shared with anybody in my life. And I remember she started crying the first time, and I couldn't understand. I was like, it used to make me angry, actually. That you remember that but I would say to myself, you didn't go through the suffering. I was the one that suffered, and you don't have to cry for me. I'm crying inside, and so there's a certain endurance that leads you through the process of kinship to joy. I mean, the word joy doesn't imply as though we met and this is a joyful relationship that we're going to have. But it was the power of the Jesus, the resemblance, as Father Boyle mentions, resemblance of Jesus that she's saying into the ministry. I came here to represent the Lord in in herself, and that's one of the things that joy came through the years of endurance.
So there's a lot of ways that I adopted Chris into my heart, but he also adopted me into his heart. And of course, in the scriptures, in the Bible, we are adopted into the family of God. And this verse has been really helpful for me, because if I just think of, if we think of kind of a parent-child relationship, there's a power differential in that. In fact, that I'm the one and I adopted him. But the fact is that in God we are mutually adopted. So that means there's no platforms, right? There's this mutual adoption that happens. So God gives us the power to become children of God. So we're all children of God together. We're actually children of God. I spend quite a lot of time in Skid Row and working in areas like that of the city. And when I walk, I say to myself, every person here is beloved of God, right? Every person here is as valued to God as me. And the thing is, I believe that in my head, but our society doesn't teach us that. Our society teaches that people with more money and more, have more value. And we have to really let our hearts be transformed to realize that every person has the same value. Can you go ahead and go to the next one? I really love, Desmond Tutu is one of my heroes, and he talks about something called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is something that's very African. And we're going to talk a little bit about what are the barriers to radical kinship. But I think one of the huge barriers in this country to kinship, all kinds of kinship, not just, I think it's actually, even in blood kinship, it's a struggle. But it's hyper-individualism in American culture. And this is kind of the opposite of that. And And so this is my vision for what God wants for us. So he says Ubuntu speaks of the very essence of being human. We say, hey, so-and-so who's Ubuntu. Then they are generous, hospitable, friendly, and caring, and compassionate. You share what you have. It is to say, my humanity is caught up, inextricably bound up in yours. We belong in a bundle of life. A person is a person through other persons. It's the healing power of relationships. It's through connection. We don't become, and that's why in our prison system, when we put people in isolation for 23 hours a day, that is so harmful to them. It doesn't happen, because they become less human by being isolated, the more we're isolated. Putting older folks, I read this thing. We used to have elders, now we have the elderly. We put our elderly away, in isolation sometimes, and that is such a break in our humanity. We have so much disconnection in our lives. Mother Teresa says, we have forgotten that we belong to each other. Father Greg says this a lot, so do I. And then I add together, we belong to God. So we've forgotten we belong to each other. And we have this illusion of being the strong one, of being able to make it in this world. There's this whole ethos in American culture of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and being able to make it on your own. And that is so deeply ingrained in our culture that it's actually hard for us to actually really need each other. This is also part of hospitality. Who comes, and I want you to think about this question. Who comes to your birthday party? You don't have to answer it unless you want to. Friends come to your birthday party. So who are those friends? And this is just a question for us to think about. Christine Pohl, she writes a lot about hospitality, and she says there's two aspects to hospitality that are really important. One is mutuality, and the other is vulnerability. And she says Americans can sometimes get to the thing of mutuality. Father Greg talks about exquisite mutuality, which we've kind of adopted that term because it's such a good, that's how I see about our relationship. But are we willing to be the vulnerable one in a relationship? It's more blessed to give than to receive. So the greatest poverty is to have nothing to give. So we are so trained in our churches and in our culture that it's a blessing to give to others. I don't know, how about you? How many of you love to give? You love to give? I love to give. However, someone also has to receive that gift. So if we are always the one giving, if we are the ones who have the power and the resources to give, the other person is always receiving. So the mutuality comes when we realize that we have as much to receive as to give to the other person. And I think sometimes in our head we think this, but I know for me, it's been decades of God transforming my heart to really believe that that's the case. So when I'll tell you, I spent a number of years a few years in Kathmandu, Nepal, years ago when I was young. And there was no communication, no cell phones or anything then. And so right before I left, I took the bus to a place from Kathmandu to Pokhara. And it's a crazy ride through the mountains because it's the Himalayas, right? And so I ended up in this town called Pokhara, and I spent time with friends. And where the bus picks you, drops you off, it's what's called the lakeside. There's nothing there, so it's completely dark. And anyway, so I was going back to Kathmandu. I didn't have any money. Nobody uses credit cards there, at least not in that time. And so halfway through the mountains going back, the road, it was monsoon, and the road got washed out. So they go, oh, we have to go back to Pokhara. And I was like, I don't have any money. I have nothing. I was completely vulnerable. I thought, what's going to happen to me when I get to Pokhara? It's like, I had some friends in town, but it was like dark, and they were like this is like midnight. It's like the end of the world. The minute everyone goes to bed at 8 o'clock, right? And with the sun. So I was like, oh God, dear Lord, what am I going to do? So I arrived at, got off the bus, and this Nepali man comes to me, and he goes, And we had a team working there. There was a guy named Steve. They called him Dr. Steve. He wasn't a doctor, but he would do all this stuff, you know. He was just a part of the community there. And he looked at me and he said, I know you. You're friends with Dr. Steve. He said, you see that hotel over there? That's my hotel. He says, I don't know how long this is going to take, but he goes, you can stay there and you eat as much as you want until you go back to Kathmandu. And then he invited me with his family to have meals. And I was like, wow, I wonder if he came to the United States and he was there without anything, would he be welcomed the way I was welcomed to Kathmandu? But to find that welcome, I had to be I was in a completely vulnerable place. You know, when we travel, when we have everything, and that's part of our problem in this country, is some of us have so much. In a lot of ways, we don't really need to be vulnerable, at least not in terms of physical resources. And so what does it mean to be willing to be vulnerable so that we also need the other person?
I wanted to share something about that. And Father Will mentioned is the no expectations, and no thinking. When I met Jude, I didn't. The first time I saw her, I didn't think she was my savior in life, right? I didn't see. Well, she's a Christian
from
woman.
savior to savior.
Right, and she was a Christian woman, or she's an adult. She's gonna restore my life. But it was the process of God putting that bridge, that at the moment where she said, well, I'm going to listen to this kid. I don't know him. He didn't know anything about me. I mean, I was new in the neighborhood. I was from a different neighborhood coming into, meeting Roxy to that neighborhood. And so there was no expectations, and she didn't have any expectations, and I didn't have it. And I think that was the part of the kinship that opened up and created the bridges between my trust to her and that kind of neutrality.
Before we do this, why don't you tell the story about your cousin? So this is another great story of radical kinship. I sometimes think that where one of the places where things are going to really break down is as America, as our society becomes older and older. Young white millennials are not the people who are going to take care of older folks. They're not doing home health care. All the home health care is being done by Kenyans and Guatemalans and so on, right? So Chris has a great story about his cousin Levy, who does home health care he's from Guatemala.
Yeah, but he started working at a home care, right? And I don't think he's ever done, to take care of people. But apparently he was working at a home, right? Convalescent home, which is where people land. And usually when older people don't have anywhere to go, or family members who care for them in their homes, they're sent to these places after surgery or a major illness. Yeah. So he was asked to help this man. I guess he ended up in that place and asked him if he will take care of him at his place in Malibu, one of the hills there. So he took out on that job, and he's been there for.
And he didn't have a place to live. He was living with his mom.
He was living with his mom, and this is a place where he was offered a place to live, and him and his wife moved into the place and are taking care of this 90-year-old man living in that home by themselves. And it's a provision for him to, a roof over his head.
So it's a win-win because this man has nobody in the world. And so Levy and his wife are there and living in the house, taking care of this old man in the hills of Malibu. And he turned 90 years old. And they said, well, we should have a party. You're turning 90 years old. And he says, I don't have anyone to invite to a party. And Levy's like, we do. So the whole Guatemala, it's like a whole crew of Guatemalans turned up. It's like a 90-year-old birthday, that should be celebrated. So like all the cousins and everybody just like came up to Malibu.
We came to lift up his spirit. That was my, I don't know this man. I don't know who he is, where he comes from, but there was to me when I was invited, I was like, I want to go there because I want to lift up his spirit. I want to celebrate with him that he is alive.
And I thought, what an amazing gift for Levi and his wife, and what an amazing gift for this old man. Who's him?
George.
George. And what an amazing gift for George, who has nobody in the world. And I thought, how radical kinship. So that story, that's another radical kinship story, isn't it? And how do we help make those things come together? So before we talk a bit more about that, could we do the next slide?
Yeah.
The barriers. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about, I have to stay by the mic. I usually walk around more. What are the barriers to radical kinship? So we have a few examples of when it happens, but why is it so hard? Why doesn't it happen more often? I want a discussion here. I want you to think.
Step out of your own schedule.
Yeah, so I have internal and external. So part of it is our schedules. We have to lead very scheduled lives, don't we? Yeah. So part of it is Father Greg said something very interesting today. He talked about confessing the shame that he saw that woman as an interruption. And I thought, one of the things that God really spoke to me actually when I met Chris, and it took hours. We ended up spending, I was supposed to be like starting my PhD and stuff. And Chris was like this huge interruption in my life. He was a huge, messy interruption in my life. And God said, my best work is through interruptions. When you let go of the control of your life and you work through interruptions. Let me tell you one story. You know this story. It's the story in the Bible about the bleeding woman. So this woman's been bleeding for 12 years. She's a woman, she's unclean, and somehow she gets close enough to Jesus to touch the hem of his garment. How a woman in her weakened state could do that? She really wanted to be there, right? She had great faith. So she touched Jesus's robe, and we know the story. We know she was healed. And Jesus stops. Now, Jesus is on his way to Jairus' daughter, to heal Jairus' daughter, right? They've called him a very important person. And so this woman, this story is on the way, and I realized this story is an interruption in the life of Jesus. Jesus was headed that way, and I thought, if it was me, and I was headed to Jairus' house, and a woman touched me, and the power, and she got healed, I think I would have just kept going to Jairus' house, because it was an interruption. And what does Jesus do? He stops. Why does Jesus stop? She's already healed.
He felt the power going.
He felt the power out of him. And he had an encounter with the woman, didn't he? He said, "Who touched me?" And of course, I'm picturing like she's just shaking, right? Because she did this in secret. And now her shame is going to be for everyone to see, right? And so she says, "That was me." And Jesus, the term Jesus uses here is the only time Jesus ever uses this term. He says, "My daughter. My daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." You see, she was physically healed, but it's about the relationship. She could have disappeared and she would have been anonymous and been physically healed, but she would have carried all the shame of that 12 years of being an outcast woman, unclean woman. But Jesus drew her into the family of God. He called her by the kinship name. And in that moment, her soul is healed as well as her body. But it was an interruption. And so when I think about that, and someone will come and, when I'm fuller teaching, and, someone will come knocking on the door and I'm preparing for class and I'm just like, feeling like this is an interruption, and it's like, but maybe it's an interruption. Maybe the most important work in our life comes through the interruptions. Anyway, so internal barriers, schedule, not knowing how to live our life in the interruption. What else? What are the other barriers? I've alluded to some of them. What are some of the internal barriers? Yeah.
Well, language.
Language. Well, language can be a barrier for sure. Yeah.
I think maybe cynicism,
Cynicism.
not believing that it could actually happen.
Yeah.
Fear.
So, a type of unbelief, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cynicism.
Fear. You get out of our comfort zones.
Pardon?
It involves having to get out of our comfort zones, surround ourselves with people who are not like us in places that we're not used to.
Right, getting out of our comfort zones.
Culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, she and I had many clashes and stuff because of culture.
We had big fights over culture, like time. Oh my
Time,
goodness.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. But, we'll go on.
I think fear is a big one.
Fear is a very big one, isn't it? Yeah. What do we fear?
I fear that I'm going to be hurt by somebody. For dumb reasons, why would they? But nevertheless.
Yeah, that's one of the things that she and I had, but like barriers, in Guatemala, the culture, right, is like, hey, you want to come to a party? It's, sure. What time? At 10. Okay, so I'll be there at 10 p.m. instead of 10 a.m. And so that was a struggle, or, she will say, we'll have lunch tomorrow, we'll meet someplace at this time, and my dad had said to me the day before, can you meet me for work tomorrow at 12? And I'll say to Jude, knowing that I had to go to my dad, yeah, I'll meet you there tomorrow, and then she'll be waiting for me the next day.
Just
at
before
our
school.
place. And so, that's just one. I'm back now, right?
There was also fear. Yeah, it's really. Well, you know what we do now, and it's, I think when we really get to know people, we can actually kind of joke about culture, like. So like I'll do something, and he'll go, "You're really using your white power, aren't you?" And he'll do something like when he can't say no to me, and I'm like, "You're just being so Guatemalan." So there's a way that we have learned to be able to look at those differences and actually have some humor about them instead of being offended by them. But I think the fear is huge, and there's many different things we fear. I think I had a lot of fear when I started to really. It was one thing to move into the neighborhood and work with all the young people. When I started to really give my heart to Chris, that was scary. And I realized, I felt like it was the risk of a great unknown. And part of the risk is Chris you're seeing Chris now. He had issues. So did I, but that's. But I thought, what if Chris actually picks up a gun and kills somebody? Because he was that angry. I thought, what if I've met Chris just to visit him in solitary, maybe he kills somebody and I spend the rest of my life visiting him in prison. And so I prayed about that, and God said, so what if he needs you the rest of his life to visit him in prison, right? It's like, why, what actually are you afraid of? And I think for me, I was afraid because I had no idea where this journey was going to go. So it is scary, because now we can look back at it, but at that time, we had no idea where this was going to go. Now we got that nice picture, we got the grandkids, but at that time, there's no guarantee that it's going to be a nice journey. And so there's reasons we fear. But the Bible is, it's clear. What casts out fear? Perfect love, right? It's love that casts out fear. And so my love became greater than my fear to overcome the fear. But I think, and the reason I bring this up is I think that we have to be very honest about the barriers. And, because I love listening to Father Greg, and it's like, yeah, but how do you get there, right? And what's standing in the way of us actually getting there? A couple other things, what are other barriers, both either internal or external?
Just one observation is that it was a natural relationship. It wasn't you going out there to save. There wasn't this whole thing. It was something that just happened and a natural progression.
It was, and I think one of the things that I'm aware of is that I happened to move into that neighborhood in a missional kind of setting. And I teach urban studies, and one of the things we learn in urban studies is that we've actually created cities so we don't have to be by the other. We've created zoning laws, and we've created redlining, all kinds of things, so we mostly live in neighborhoods that are with people like us. In city, Tom.
I was going to say social location, by which I mean, as a San Bernardino coming to Santa Barbara, I can't believe the price of real estate here and the number of white people who are here. it just feels uncomfortable. And I know we carry our prejudices with us, but the fact is, it's like, get a Hispanic, get a black person in the room. I mean, what's the deal with this whiteness? So it's just hard to, it's hard to feel comfortable in a context that's so uniformly European American.
And so what are different things that we can do? So one of the so that would also be a barrier too. What are some other, so part of it is the way we've constructed cities. There's whole cities built around and neighborhoods of people that are kind of similar. So what do we do with that? And I've talked to some people here, I know some people here, and I think that we have this desire to see walls broken down. But what are some of the ways we can get there? But I do think that we have to acknowledge the internal things inside of us, as well as the external barriers. And external barriers are the ways we've created our cities, so that we often don't have access to other people, in neighborhoods. If you live in the center of a city, there's a lot of research on this in urban studies. So in older cities, you had kind of a downtown area, and you actually had rich and poor living right next to each other. Everybody was right there in the center of the city. And then we created suburbs and cars, and all of a sudden, people started moving to safer locations and moving out. And so people who had resources left other parts of the city. So what happens now is we're not neighbors. And so how do we cross those bridges? Tom, did you? Yeah. Can you give me the next slide? Oh, yeah. Sorry. So someone mentioned this, so I want to talk a little bit about comfort zones. So we use this in cross-cultural studies. So green is the comfort zone. Take a deep breath. In your comfort zone, you breathe deeply, you feel comfortable. You don't have to think about saying something stupid. You don't have to feel guilty because maybe you have money and someone doesn't, or maybe you feel ashamed. So this is two different words. In your comfort zone, maybe if you have resources, other people have resources, so you don't feel guilty about having resources. Or if you don't have much money, like the neighborhood I used to live in, then there's lots of people who are under-resourced, so you don't feel ashamed that you don't have resources. My friend Josefina told me, we were neighbors for years, and she said, this country's not like El Salvador. I said, it's true. She said, and it's different being poor here. She said, in El Salvador, we were all poor, so we didn't even notice. It's like you said, you didn't notice. And she said, and so we were all there together. But she says, in this country, it's shameful to be poor. People make you feel like it's your fault. And so I think we also have to think about what has our culture not just taught us, but what is our culture teaching other people about who they are, and whether they are truly acceptable and welcomed and included here. And the interesting thing about comfort zone, and this is tied to what Tom said, is that once you live in an area that's more diverse, you actually your comfort zone changes, right, Tom? So where you're comfortable is changed. So now when I come to places that, like when I go back to my Dutch Christian Reformed church, and everybody looks like me, I'm just kind of like, I guess these are my people, but, my people has changed. I have a lot of, which is how God has. So green is our comfort zone. So yellow is when we push a little bit past the comfort zone and we end up in the yellow zone. And we have to be willing to step out of the comfort zone into the yellow zone. I believe that God does his greatest work in us in the yellow zone. When we stay in the green zone, we don't have to change much. We can just kind of stay the way we are. But once we start stepping out, whether it's with people who have different abilities than we have, or people who are the other, Father Greg always says there's no us and them, there's only us. But the fact is, a lot of us live in worlds, all of us live in worlds of us and them. And so when we start to move into the world of the other, we start to become comfortable. And so we can either keep pushing through, and what happens, or we can step back into the green. And what happens though, is that as we step into the yellow, the green zone actually gets bigger. So I think we start off with small green zones, but the longer we travel in different circles, and a short-term mission trip might be one thing, getting involved in some kind of thing, but our green zone can get a bit bigger. The reason the red zone is sometimes we push so far, and a lot of us have been, where we actually become completely overwhelmed and paralyzed. And when we're in the red zone, we actually don't grow anymore. And we have to step back into the yellow zone. So that's just a self-awareness thing. As we do this journey towards radical kinship, there will be a time where something will just feel really overwhelming, and we take a step back, and then can step out again. So that's just a little, but what I love about this is that our comfort zone can get bigger and bigger and bigger as we, spend our lives in different, so your comfort zone is completely different than it would have been if you'd stayed in the neighborhood. He actually he hangs out with white people now and doesn't get freaked out anymore.
I was talking about, when I first met the Tiersma family, I was talking to Teo about it this morning. It was part of myself, the inner self. I didn't show it, but I was intimidated. I was kind of like in myself, and I felt this tightness within myself. And I can be in a large group, and I can be with a lot of different people and feel comfortable within myself. And at that time, even I remember meeting Peter, and I was like,
that's my brother.
He made me shake.
He was a lawyer.
He was a strong figure,
He was a lawyer and
right.
top lawyer.
He was my favorite.
I know. After the first Thanksgiving, I thought he was going to love my dad because my dad's kind of like, he's like, and I said, hey, how'd you like my family? He goes, I love your brother Peter. I was like, you do? Because they were like polar opposites. And Peter's he's like a lawyer, like type A lawyer. I mean, he was brilliant, and they became really close friends. Peter, I remember Teo was away doing research, and early on, and Peter invited Chris and a friend to come spend the weekend in Goleta, and he made them banana pancakes and hung out with them, and I was like, and I thought, wow, that's wonderful for Chris and Omar, but it's also wonderful for Peter, right? Because all of our lives need to be transformed. Right? And I think that what I want to say about fear, I think that it's really important to think about fear, but I think it's important to remember that fear goes both ways. So I had this guy come to speak at Fuller, and he was from Victory Outreach, and his name was Max. Used to call me the assassin. He looked like Max, the assassin, right? And so we had all these Fuller Seminary students in there, and he goes, I want to tell you something. I'm as intimidated by you as you are by me. He says, you look at me, you look at my tattoos, you look at and he says, and I'm intimidating to you, right? And everybody's like, and he said, your education, everything about you, all the power you have in society is completely intimidating to me as a person. So that's where we have to think, it's not just how the interior barrier is not just how I'm feeling, but how to put ourselves in the shoes of the other. The Native American saying, never judge a person until you've walked a mile in their moccasins. So what is it, and I think to myself, especially we have all the struggles with homelessness in LA, and that it's so easy to be critical or judgmental or whatever, but I think, wow, try to imagine walking in those shoes, and then we will be more compassionate people, right? So comfort zone is the next one. Okay, what are some steps towards radical savior? Kinship, how do we move from savior to saver? So one of the things I think is our posture, meaning not just, I need to stand up straight, right? Our posture towards the world. So one thing is an open heart. You're all here at this conference on radical kinship, so I know that the desire is there, right? But we have to be willing to have our lives transformed, and not just to be transformed and actually turned upside down. The process, it can be really, really messy. And we might find things in ourselves. So one of the things, and I struggle with this still. It's like I don't know what to do with the fact that I'm a white, educated woman with all the privilege that I have. And if I stay in circles like me, I don't actually have to ask those questions. But if I really want to live in other worlds besides my own, people might challenge me on my privilege. And that's awkward. And I have shame about that. And I wish it wasn't like that in this world. But I do have a lot more power than a lot of other people. And what am I going to do with that? And I'm willing to say, you know, and like when I'll say, John too, he's African American, and he'll say, you really assume a lot of control in your life. And I was like, yeah, I do. That's how I was raised. So, but we can, but once it's there, we can talk about it. We can unpack it. We can, and we can learn to let go of some of the power and privilege when we are with others. And this whole thing about control, the world that a lot of us grew up in is a high control world. And one of the things I have learned about being with Chris and all his friends and many other people in the world, they don't have much control over their lives. When you don't have as many resources, life is like surfing chaos. And you know, I'm really not into surfing chaos, but I've got better at it. Am I a little better? I'm a little better at surfing the chaos. On the one hand, I've learned to surf chaos a little better. But Chris and Roxy are really grateful for the kind of stability that my life offers. You see, it goes both ways, right? So I've learned to flow with life more, but they find value in that the Tiersma family is kind of like, relax. You know, do you want to say something about that? Is that true?
Yeah.
We've never talked about this.
You know, they say, well, we're gonna leave in 10 minutes. Like, get the kids, and you know, we're in Hispanic, right? So it's like 10 minutes is like, oh, what? Later.
And John,
But you know, that's just one of the personas that kind of